A very good evening to all of you who are here today to make this event a success. I'm Surya Ratnayaka, moderator for today's evening. IEEE Hobnobbers, the event organized on behalf of IEEE Day 2021 with the collaboration of 4 main IEEE student branches, including University of Kelaniya, Woyolassa University, Sri Lanka Technological Campus, and University of Vocational Technology, has passed 2 successful events so far. Today, we are remarking the 3rd milestone of IEEE Hobnobbers, Dive into Deep Learning, mainly organized by the IEEE student branch of University of Kelaniya. Before the initiation of the session, I would like to invite Mr. Mihir Ranasinghe, the chairperson of the IEEE student branch of University of Kelaniya, to welcome our guest speaker and the gathering to this event. Mihir, over to you.
So thank you very much, Isuruni, and good evening to everyone who presents today. It's an extreme pleasure to welcome you all for the 3rd session of IEEE Day program in this year, in collaboration with the IEEE student branch of Sri Lanka Technological Campus and the Woyolassa University, and also the University of Vocational Technology. So on behalf of the IEEE student branches, I would like to offer my regards to everyone who is joining us in this evening. And I convey my special regards to the guest speaker of the day. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and coming over for this evening. So as the 3rd session of the IEEE Day session series, the main purpose of this event is to giving you an introductory idea about what deep learning is, and regarding the bigger companies and the bigger companies around the world who are doing with it, and what career opportunities and what educational opportunities that you people can gain through the deep learning and AI, and where you people can start. So I would like to welcome the main guest speaker for the day, Ms. Savindhi Vijayanayaka, who is a machine learning engineer at WSO2 and also a former research engineer trainee at Pearson Lanka. She's a talented software engineering graduate from University of Kelaniya, Sri Lanka. And also, she's a passionate individual about machine learning and deep learning related to the healthcare industry. So, yeah, without any further ado, let's start the session. And again, I would like to thank you very much for everyone who is joining us in this evening. So, welcome you all for the session and enjoy the session. Thank you very much. And over to you, Isuruni.
Thank you very much, Mihindraya. That was a warm welcome. So guys, it's time for today's highlight. Deep learning is one of the most interesting and demanding field of study in this era. So we decided to dive deep into deep learning with you all today. And with us here, we have the best diver who can guide us through this dive. Let me introduce you all our guest speaker, Ms. Savindhi Vijayanayaka. Ms. Savindhi is a talented software engineering graduate from University of Kelaniya. Rather than saying just a graduate, she's more a passionate individual about applications of machine learning and deep learning in the field of healthcare. She's currently employed as a machine learning engineer at WSO2 and was a former trainee software research engineer at Pearson. Moreover, she was once the local committee vice president of management and marketing chapter of ISEC in University of Kelaniya. And guys, she's the black belt holder in karate and was once the captain of karate team of the University of Kelaniya. Without further explanations, please welcome Ms. Savindhi on the spotlight. Ms. Savindhi, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you for that wonderful introduction. So let me quickly share my screen. Is it visible to you all?
Yes, Saki, it's visible.
Okay, okay. So, okay, now since they have given the introduction about me, I will not go into any details about myself. Without a further ado, let's dive into our topic itself. So when it comes to deep learning, it is actually a buzzword in the current industry. So there are a lot of research opportunities, there are a lot of higher education opportunities, which spans across a lot of domains. For example, deep learning is involved in medicine side, education side, system performance. In our company, we do a lot of system performance related researches. So there are a lot of applications in deep learning. So, but this all starts with one small place. So today we are going to build up our knowledge from the start so that you can further learn by yourself when you have free time. So in the today's discussion, what we are going to talk about first is how our brain is working. And then we will talk about the building block of deep neural networks, which is perceptron. And then we'll see how the models are learning the things that they are learning. And we'll go into talk about deep neural networks in action, where we talk about different fields in applications in deep neural networks, different architectures in deep neural networks, and also some of the blossoming areas in deep learning field. Finally, we will then talk about, as a student, how you can build up your knowledge and what you can do to be someone industry ready. Okay, right. Next, we will look at how the human brain is working. So this human brain is actually a set of neurons interconnected. So they pass information through your brain to take certain actions. So let's discuss with an example, because it's just a statement. Let's see how actually it works. So let's say someone is punching you. So now there is an object which is coming towards you, right? So with your eyes, it sees that there is some object. How it sees is, it fires up certain set of neurons in your brain saying that there's some kind of an object there. And another set of neurons fire up saying that, okay, this object is actually moving, right? Together, these two set of neurons fire up another set of neurons, which is understanding this is a moving object. And then this neuron set fire up another neuron set, which says this is a danger. Likewise, again, that neuron set fire up another neuron set saying, take some action. For example, move your head. So likewise, from the input to action, there's an information propagation throughout your interconnected neural network, which is residing in your brain. So this is all conceptual, and the smallest decision taking in your brain is actually called a biological neuron. So now, since you have the bigger picture about the brain and how it takes certain decisions, let's go inside and analyze one of those neurons. So when it comes to a biological neuron, what happens is these dendrites take inputs from your senses. So inside the neuron, the nucleus take decisions depending on the inputs that it gets. So the important thing is, the neuron is responsible to identify which input is actually important to him. So when it identify, okay, certain inputs I got is actually important to me, so I am going to activate, so that the neuron is going to activate. When a neuron is activated, it passes that information through the axon to the next neuron or the set of neurons which are connected with it. So this way, the neuron takes the input and check whether that input is important to that neuron, and if it is important, it convey that message, it propagate that information to another set of neurons which are connected. So let's move on and see how this happens with an example. Let's say you are given a task to identify number 9. So if we take number 9, we know that there's one circle and one line responsible to create a number 9. So one neuron in your brain is responsible to identify a circle. Another neuron in your brain is responsible to identify a line. So together, if both of them sees what they are supposed to see, they light up another neuron which is responsible to identify number 9. So I put this in a simpler way, saying that one neuron is identifying a circle, one neuron is identifying a line. However, this is not actually the case. So the neurons are responsible to understand smaller features, small level features, lower level features like edges. So together, these edges combine and create a higher level feature like a circle. So together with another set of high level features, they create something like number 9. So each of these neurons work together and gather information. So the small inputs aggregate to create a bigger decision. So I hope the idea is clear about how our brain see things. So up to this point, you might think that this is going to be a biology lesson, but no, let's look at how this get connected with the deep neural networks. So moving on, I told about the biological neuron. So we are going to model this biological neuron using mathematics. So like the dendrites take the input, and the nucleus decide which inputs are important, our mathematical neuron is also deciding which inputs are important to itself. So for that, they use something called the weights. So the weights are actually a way of saying how much this particular input is important to this particular neuron. So keep that in mind because we will need it in a later slide. Okay. So that previous slide I showed you the simplest form of neural network, simplest form of mathematical modeling of biological neuron is called as a perceptron. So actually this perceptron, the concept of perceptron surfaced back in 1950s, end of 1950s. So it did not, however, progress very fast. That is due to the fact that on those days, the computational power is really low. So therefore, it did not progress as fast as now. So they step by step enhance the concept of perceptron. Like, for example, if you can see here, multi-output perceptron, which stack together two perceptrons together. And then in the single layer neural networks, what they did is they arrange neurons in a way that there are two layers rather than a single layer. So, however, this limitations of computational power and all those things were not giving a proper progress to the deep neural network based researchers. So why now it is progressing really fast is because of three facts. First thing is availability of data. So when we talk about data, before like 5 or 6 years, the internet is not as common as nowadays, right? But now many of people are in social media platforms, and even there are other platforms like blogs, etc. So a lot of data get accumulated each and every day. Also, there are a lot of good sensors coming in which can take inputs from the natural world. So this data is actually a a good thing for deep neural networks because deep neural networks thrives on data. The other thing is the main factor that contributes to the advance of deep neural networks, that is the hardware capabilities. So if you remember around 10 to 20 years ago, we had the floppy disk, right? But about the size and the amount of data it can hold, and compare that with the modern day pen drives. How much data can a pen drive hold? So the hardware capabilities are advancing rapidly, especially the introduction of GPUs and TPUs resulted in a lot of computational power that can aid the deep neural network and also the deep learning field. Also, there are concepts like cloud and distributed computing, which gave the capability of training models in a distributed manner. The third thing is availability of advanced software and programming concepts. If we are to code a perceptron or a neural network back in those days, you will have to write it from the scratch. So nowadays, what happens is there are a lot of libraries which are already having ready-made APIs and ready-made facilities to give those machine learning and deep learning related concepts. For example, if it is a perceptron, we can write it with a single line by using nowadays higher level APIs. So these kind of things actually resulted in huge, you can say, advance in the deep learning field in the current world. So therefore, the scientists got the capability of creating deep neural networks which are having a lot of layers. So this is just perceptrons stacked together and stacked in layers to achieve a common task. So if you remember the first example I told, the example of identifying number 9, this is a system, a deep neural network with 2 layers that is dedicated to understand a number 9. So in the first layer, the inputs, and then the second layer, it is getting the, sorry, in the first line, it is showing the inputs, and the second layer is getting the edges, and the third layer is getting the circle and the line like we had before. And the last layer is finally identified that it is a 9. So how can we do what we want to do using these models, these deep learning models? How can we do what we want to do? So let's talk about how the models are learning. First, what we do is we initialize a model. So by initializing, what I meant is we say this number of layers are there, this number of neurons are there in one layer, and this is our initial weight. So remember, the weight means how much important a particular input is to that particular neuron. So at the beginning, we don't know anything about the input at all. So we are just giving a random weight. Then what we do is we give it one data point, and that data point pass through from left to right in the model. And finally, it is giving an output, which we call as a prediction. So this output is actually depending on a random weight. So it can be actually wrong. So this information flow from left to right is known as the forward propagation. And I told that it might be wrong. So we are checking if actually it is wrong or not. So that is why we have the actual label. Label means that this is a 9, like that we have the label. So we compare that label with the prediction. So let's say the model has predicted that it is 8, so which is wrong, right? So in that case, there are some loss calculated. That means the gap between the prediction and the actual. So when the model calculates the loss, what it does next is it is understanding how much it should adjust its weights to achieve the correct prediction. So remember again, I told about the weights and how we denote the importance of an input. So when we update the weight, we are saying, okay, this neuron needs this input to get activated. So likewise, you are updating the weight to tell the model which inputs that they should pay attention to. So this way, when we calculate the loss and propagate that information backwards to update the weights, that is called as backward propagation. Together with the forward propagation, the backward propagation creates an epoch. Epoch is actually a pass through from left to right and right to left. So one information passing through the neural network and giving a prediction, and then we are checking the loss and adjusting the weights. So this whole thing is called as an epoch or an iteration. So when we are training a model, what we do is we give multiple data points and we go through multiple iterations so that the network keep adjusting depending on the feedback calculated through the loss. So this way, we train our model to understand that this is a 9 or this is not a 9, likewise. So up to now, I simplified things for the ease of understanding. I would suggest you to go ahead and check more on the math side of the perceptron. And also there's another concept called activation. So these things you can go ahead and search now, because now you have the fundamental idea about what is a deep neural network is. So another thing is I describe everything using a vision example, like we were classifying a 9 or not, right? However, there are a lot of applications other than vision, which we are going into and look into. So the vanilla DNNs, vanilla deep neural networks get improved with maths so that it can perform well on any task that is given to it. So this gave birth to a lot of different families in deep neural networks. The first one I will talk about is convolutional neural networks. So this is a neural network architecture which is heavily used in computer vision side. So the intuition behind this is that, let's say we are looking at a cat. So even though the cat is lying down or sitting or standing, it doesn't matter to us. We anyway identify that it is a cat, right? So the same way, the model should identify any object in any orientation, irrespective of the orientation. So also if it is rotated or not, these things should not matter to the model. So to give that capability, the idea of convolutional neural networks came into play. So there are like 4 main tasks in used in convolutional neural networks. We can achieve 4 main tasks using convolutional neural networks. So the first thing is classification. So classification is actually like we are looking at an image and classifying whether it is cat or dog, like that. And the classification and localization together give us who is in the photo and where it is. Then the next one is object detection, where you identify each and every object in the image and also their location. The final one is actually instance segmentation. This is really important when it comes to medical imaging stuff. So here what we do is we identify what is the object and exact pixels which belongs to that particular object. So let's see some of the applications of CNNs. Of course, it's heavily used in computer vision side, in face recognition systems, where you identify who is this person. This is used a lot in bigger companies when like their premium customers comes in, they have to give a special treatment to them, so they use face recognition sort of systems. Also, the other one is medical imaging. I told this before as well. So for example, we can use MRIs and detect brain tumors, and also in lung x-rays we can detect pneumonia conditions. So for those we can use convolutional neural networks. I know the third example is something you are very familiar with, that is self-driving cars. So in self-driving cars such as Teslas, they have used before the convolutional neural networks to identify objects in the on the road. Another set of applications are there. Some are fun ones, like colorizing historic images. It is in a way useful as well. Then apart from the computer vision side, this can also be used in audio and signal processing. Especially in, for example, it can be used in music genre recognition, and yeah, so like that. So it's not actually limited to computer vision side. Now let's move on to another family of deep neural networks. So the recurrent neural networks. To give you the idea behind this, let me tell you an example. So let's say I tell you, Mary went to the well. She fell. So there are two sentences. Mary went to the well, she fell. So if I tell you just the second sentence, you will ask me, who is she? Because you don't know the first sentence. So similarly, like you want to understand the context, the machine also, or the model also need to understand the context to give a proper answer. So that is why the recurrent neural networks are really important. In recurrent neural networks, they have a mechanism to keep sort of information which appeared prior and is important to them to take certain decisions. So this is actually used a lot in natural language processing. However, it is performing well in any other sequential data as well. For example, this is heavily used in time series analysis and even in music generation. So if we take music generation, it is actually a sequence of notes, and therefore we can use recurrent neural networks. And even drawing generation, for example, even the drawing generation, we can think as a sequence of brush strokes. So therefore, we can use recurrent neural networks in there also. So if you see the third image in here, only the first flower I draw, and the rest of it is drawn by an RNN. You actually can play around with these demos, like I have put the links in the slide set. Moving on to the next one. This is encoder-decoder architecture. This is a bit of a new architecture. Here what we do is again preserving context. So if I tell you mother or mom or ma, you know all these three words mean the same. That is sort of a contextual understanding. So in the encoder decoder, we preserve that understanding. So input encodes it, the input it get to a certain representation, which we can decode back to an output. So this is heavily used in machine translation tasks and also image captioning and anomaly detection. So in anomaly detection, like it can be in any field. For example, it can be system performance anomaly. It can be ECG anomaly, which is in the medical domain. It can also be anomaly in, let's say, natural parameters like earthquake data or something. So the anomalies can be in any domain, but still these architectures work well. And the next one is GANs, Generative Adversarial Networks. So if you have watched a movie called Catch Me If You Can, you know that forger tries to forge those, do forgery, but the FBI agent, is trying to catch him. So each time he tried to forge something, the FBI agent is also getting closer to catch him. So similarly, the GANs are working like that. So the generator is faking some data and generating a data. Let's say it is generating a human face. So the discriminator is trying to tell us whether it's fake or real. So this way, the generator and discriminator both get improved, and finally, the generator become capable of creating very realistic images from the input that it is getting. So this is heavily used in anomaly detection side, and also in music generation kind of things. And the one famous application in here is anime character generation, and also in text to image translation, where you say something like, there is a child with a red frock. So the model is responsible to create that image for you. And the image to image translation is again another very interesting thing, where you give, if you see the picture, second picture in here, if you give the daytime image and you are asking it to generate the nighttime image. The final application is something you are very familiar with. If you have used the app TuneMe or Snapchat or Insta, then you will probably know about those different filters. You can do aging, face aging. You can create yourself as a cartoon. So these things are inspired by generative adversarial networks. Moving on to our final application, final architecture, which we are going to talk about today, that is graph neural networks. So the idea behind this, or the why this appeared, is because of the fact that some of the data we have is really complex to represent. So for example, if we take molecule data, or if we take social media data, there are a lot of links that are in between, which is equally important as the edges. So for example, if we take social media platform, who you interact, and then how often you interact, there are a lot of parameters that changes. So therefore, capturing each and every one of these links is important to a neural network. So that's why, to capture this kind of complex data like molecules and etc., we use graph neural networks. So the graph neural network, we can feed data as a graph with all the relations that it has with other node edges. So this can be used in natural language processing as well, because it can give semantic understanding of words, and also link prediction and recommendation systems, And like I said, for molecular fingerprint analysis, and it can maybe predict which of these drugs have antibiotic nature. And also in healthcare clinical decision support, for example, if you have a patient with certain history in illnesses and also certain medications, we can take decisions using AI to what sort of drug administration we can do with that patient, like that. So here I talk about few architectures up to this point, but I would like to say this is not all. I took most, like famous ones. There are a lot more than this. So please go ahead and search more on things like autoencoders, transformers. There are ones in vision and text both. So these kind of things you can search more on. Now we will look into some blossoming areas in deep learning field. So first, the unbiased AI. So let me tell you an example so that it is easy for us to understand. So back in days, like I said, some companies use like face recognition system to identify their customers. So one company did a model using celebrity data. So if we go and type celebrity in Google, a lot of time what we get is mostly Caucasian images. So therefore, in this company, what happened was this AI was biased toward Caucasian people, and they were not identifying Afro-American people, celebrities, when they come to the building. So therefore, they had to wait on queues and all. So this was one occasion that unbiased AI concept surfaced in. So another example would be in Twitter Smart Crop. So if you have used Twitter, like it should focus into that window when we put an image, right? So this Smart Crop was previously only focusing on males and also on Caucasian people. So these kind of biases in machine learning models appear because of dataset biases. So getting rid of dataset bias is a highly interested area in AI currently. The other one I told some simple examples in prior slides as well. It is AI for healthcare. This is one of the rising areas in AI applications because there are a lot of not discovered areas which are pending to be discovered. So therefore, going into this kind of field is actually really good. And there are a lot of areas that you can uncover. So when it comes to medical systems and how things happen in medical field, so there are few places where AI can come in. So one thing is obviously disease detection. So I have mentioned some parts in other slides as well, like anomaly detection in ECGs, and then segmentations on different medical images we have. Other aspects would be to do drug discovery, or else things like drug administration, how we can take intelligent decisions towards patients' welfare. So these kind of things, we can get the support of AI systems. Another important topic is federated learning. So when it comes to federated learning, the main concept here is the privacy. So we need to build privacy preserving systems. So let's say, again, a let's go back to medical field where the data is very personal. So we have to protect the privacy of that patient. So therefore, sometimes the hospitals or the clinics are not allowed to share their information. So in such cases, what we can do is we train models centrally, but using the distributed loss calculation and aggregation in the middle. So this sort of distributed manner of learning or training the model is called as the federated learning. So that is another important area coming up. Now move on to explainable AI, where I would like to give an example from another movie. So if you have watched Minority Report, there the AI is suggesting whether some person is criminal or not. So it's not giving the reason behind its decision. So it's really not helping at all. So this kind of things happen in real life too. So if we take a AI where that need to predict whether the person is eligible for a loan for a bank, so that AI should not be someone giving like out of like black box kind of decisions. They should be capable of explaining why it is not good to give this person a loan. Why this is important is the bank can get sued if a customer feels that he is eligible for the loan, but he is not getting a loan. So therefore, this is actually something important in legal aspects as well. So people are looking into explainable AI more and more. And again, this is there's another important case in explainable AI that is in medical systems. So here also it's life-threatening. So the importance of being explainable is really critical. The next topic I want to discuss is actually self-supervised computer vision. So let's understand what is self-supervised first, right? So if we talk about humans, what I have learned 2 years back and what knowledge I have now is totally different, right? We obviously evolve with time. So if we train models with labels, that means it is supervised model. So if we use labels to train models, like the example I give, we tell it is 9 and we compare the actual label with the prediction, right? So if we use labels and go on a supervised manner, this computer vision domain cannot really evolve. So that reason gave the birth to the idea that self-supervised computer vision, because previously computer vision side is heavily relying on the labels. So the other limitations of labeled data is that one thing, we cannot label everything, right? The other reason is if we take medical kind of data, we cannot label it by ourselves. We need expertise knowledge. Therefore, it's hard to have labeled data sets always. So this is why the self-supervised learning, self-supervised computer vision is really important. The last topic is ethics in AI. So again, let me take an example and describe. So let's say you are creating a self-driving car. Here, the car is seeing a child crossing the road, and then the car should either turn and hit the wall and it will actually kill the driver, or it should hit the child and go forward. So there's a decision that car should take. right? But what is actually the ethical decision in here? Whether whether the car should take the decision to turn and hit the driver. If that's the case, how can we go ahead and sell this car at all? And then if the car decide to hit the child, what happens is it ethical? So these kind of questions arise in AI systems, which gave the idea of researchers to dig deep into these fields. Another example would be the GANs. I told that we can use GANs for the advantage of generating images, right? So if you can see from 2014 to 2017, the progress of GANs, the 2017 one, we can't actually guess it's a fake image, right? So in that case, you can be imposed by someone else saying that they are you. This is a really critical thing in AI, because it can go to wrong people's hand. So therefore, researchers look into ways to identify what is fake. For example, this research on the right in the image 2, it looks at GAN generated images and try to identify features that shows a fake image and a true image separately. So this kind of research are really interesting, and there are a lot of research going in this field as well. So now we have talked a lot about what a deep neural network is and how it is learning, how the history was with the deep neural networks, and we have checked into some of the blossoming areas in AI. Finally, let's look at, if you are really interested in this field, how you can, let's say, grow yourself and start in this field. So the first thing I would like to say is, you don't have to know everything. Myself, I also don't know everything about the field. But what matters is you start somewhere and you do projects, you do blogging, you share your knowledge with others. That way, together you can achieve more and learn more. Doing some project is actually the key in developing. It doesn't matter whether it's machine learning or deep learning, or whether it is SC. Like it's a general advice for someone in our field. So even in deep learning field, it's interesting to go ahead and do projects anyway. And also it is good to showcase your projects properly. Maybe use GitHub or even LinkedIn. You can share your researches, or you can share your projects there. Start from a small place. Like I have seen some of you in doing these things already. That is actually really good. And also explore and find your interest. That means, like, you don't have to stick to one field. If you check on system performance side research and you feel it's not your thing, maybe check on something like medicine. Check on what sort of AI applications you can do in medical field. And then if that is also not fitting you, maybe check on to other things like music. Likewise, there are a lot of applications of AI, and you can go and explore more and find the field that suits you. The other important fact is the applied research is equally important as the theoretical research. So a lot of people think when it comes to the research, what matters is only the theoretical research, which means that finding a new algorithm or new architecture. But however, it is equally important to find out untouched areas, untouched applications that we can facilitate already existing architectures with. So sometimes you may be able to use a GAN in some sort of application which is not really used currently. So these things, finding and doing is really important, and these researchers are equally valued. And if you check the citations of these kind of researchers, that is also actually really high, similar to the theoretical research as well. The next thing is keeping up with the latest things. So this is something really important because this field is actually very fast moving. So you can't get outdated with this field. So therefore, what I would suggest, this is my personal opinion, like it depends on person to person. This is what I do. So what I do is actually I use Twitter a lot, and I follow a lot of like big research groups like DeepMind, etc., and also a lot of researchers who are doing computer vision related research, because I'm interested in that part. But there are a lot of researchers who are doing different things, and they are sharing their findings in the Twitter-like platforms. So you can go there and follow them, and when they put out new papers, you can maybe read the abstract, not the whole detail at once. Likewise, you can get what's going on in the day-to-day things. So another thing is, some people might be interested in reading a lot. Then in such case, there are good Medium articles, especially towards data science, and also there's KD Nuggets, and yeah, so these kind of platforms are there. And also, if you like listening to people, then maybe go ahead and listen to podcast. And also another important thing when it comes to doing project and practicing is using platforms like Kaggle, where you have freely available data sets, and you can collaborate with other people and do participate in competitions. So that is also a good way to learn. And finally, another thing I wanted to mention is that blogging and tweeting and sharing what you are learning. So it's important to do things, and it's important to share knowledge as well. Sometimes you may feel it's a small thing, but still maybe just tweet it or write a small blog with 150 or something. That is also okay. The other thing about blogging is that you can always go back and refer by yourself. For example, when I study, like I might, forget after some time what I have studied. So if I am going into depths in some subject that I'm interested in, and I want to keep track of it, I usually write a blog and maybe not publish, but keep it in the draft, so that I can go back and refer to that blog and refresh my knowledge. So you can do the same thing when you are studying as well. So that way you get to remember things for a long time as well. So I know I talked a lot, and I hope it's not confusing and it's clear all the theoretical parts I told you. There are some resources I would like to share. This MIT course, which is mentioned in the first line, that is actually a good course if you are new to deep learning. And also I would suggest Andrew Ng's course as well. There are a lot of good blogs. I mentioned one, Medium, before. So therefore, go ahead and use these resources to find out more on the field. And also, if you are starting from scratch also, you can use these resources to go ahead and build your knowledge. Okay, so thank you very much. And if you have any questions, yeah, I can take some questions, I think. Also, if you want the slide set, scan this QR code and it will take you to the slide set.
Thank you so much, Ms. Savindi, for that insightful and interesting session. I believe it helps to make a change in everyone's evening. And guys, I know you have a lot of questions to ask from Ms. Savindi, but before that, let's move on to something that can make this moment more memorable. Due to this global pandemic, almost all the events are conducted virtually, and a virtual event is not a complete one if it doesn't have a photo together. Yes, guys, it's time for the group photo. Please switch on your cameras and join with us. Hassan, let's give them some time to switch on their cameras.
Yes, people are still turning on the cameras. Okay. Let's wait a few moments. Yes, people are still turning on the camera, so we'll wait.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I'll take the photo. I'll count from 3 to 1. Guys, smile. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, thank you. The photo has been taken. Over to you, Saroni.
Okay, thank you, Devin, and thank you everyone for being with us in the group photo. So guys, let's move on to the Q&A session. If you have any problems you want to ask from Ms. Savindi, please unmute yourself and ask her directly, or you can use the chat box also. I will direct them to her.
Yes, I'll go with the first question. Ms. Savindi, I'm particularly interested in healthcare industry and what its applications in AI. Can you elaborate on how we can use AI to improve healthcare industry and like healthcare treatments and all?
Okay, so actually when it comes to healthcare industry, there are a lot of applications, like first starting from the detection of diseases. Like I mentioned, you can scan different medical images like MRIs, CTs, etc. And there you can find different anomalies, like maybe there's a brain, the tumorous cells in your brain, and maybe there is another place where you have the x-rays of chest and you have the pneumonia condition. And also there are other things, like if you go into GI tract, there are some muscles which contribute to the movement of food. So what we can identify is these muscle layers and how they whether they decay with time, how the patient's muscle layers are behaving. Those kind of things we can dig deep and identify what sort of diseases each and every patient have, using mostly using the medical images. But it also can be things like ECGs, where it's a like rhythm. So these kind of applications comes in the first stage where you identify disease. Then the second stage is mainly rising because of the pandemic situation. So there we have drug discovery. So if we take a drug discovery traditional timeline, it is about 10 years or 14 years. I can't actually remember the exact time frame. So this is hugely reduced because of the contribution from the AI field. And therefore, we can find out new drugs quicker when a disease comes up. So now if we take this current situation, this started back in 2019 end or 2020 beginning. But now we have a lot of the vaccines available, right? So these things came in quickly because of the support of AI and computational models. Another thing would be the drug administration. For example, there's some concept called ontology. I did not mention that before. So you can represent data in a way that it capture, like it's similar to graph. So there you have all the connections, all the relations, and therefore you know how to do proper drug administration, and you can identify what are the past history of medicine, like past history of illnesses, and what are the medicines that he or she is taking now, and therefore what kind of medicine is good to go ahead with. And this data can again combine with other patients' data, and therefore it can be enrich the decision-taking process. So these kind of approaches throughout the cycle of the clinic cycle, we can identify different applications. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I also have a question. As a beginner, what kind of subjects should we follow for entering this field?
For sorry, I didn't catch the last.
For entering this field.
Entering this field. Okay. So if we are going to theoretical stuff, the maths is really important. So like algebra, calculus, derivatives, all those things, very important when it comes to understanding of these particular architectures. So therefore, maths is kind of number one. Then the other things are actually, it depends on the place you work also. Like now, for example, in the place I work, we need to have understanding about distributed systems, cloud, for example. So it depends on the place you work, because in the current setup, actually the machine learning role is very debatable, because it's spanning across a lot of areas other than machine learning and AI. So therefore, you have to have the idea of things like Kubernetes, Docker, cloud computing, then basically how also the version control is important, then pipelines and all these kind of things you need to have the understanding on. So doing as of subjects, I would suggest having maths knowledge as first, and then the proper fundamentals. If you like, this depend on the university you are in. So if you have courses catering towards machine learning and deep learning, take those courses, because that will give you a good fundamental setup, so that you can by yourself build up on that fundamental. So yeah, other than the maths, it is mostly subjects created towards machine learning and deep learning specifically.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Can I go next?
Yeah, sure.
I have seen that bigger companies such as Google, Facebook doing many things with AI, but in Sri Lanka, I haven't seen it. Maybe there I see it, but it's not visible properly. So is there any reason for that, Ms. Avindi?
Okay, so yes, in Sri Lanka, the field is actually not really huge. There are only few companies, there are only few big companies in machine learning side. So it's, however, there are a lot of startups which do machine learning related things, like researchers and applied researchers especially. So the two companies I worked in is actually using machine learning related applications. But there are other companies, I don't know whether I should suggest or not though. However, if you search, like you can find, there are some big companies also in machine learning field.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, it's to add to that, it's more like in you know, even with technology, we are a bit behind than the world, right? So that is there when it comes to the job field as well. So that's the reason why you don't see much machine learning opportunities. But when you go outside Sri Lanka, there are a lot of opportunities in this field, and there are a lot of people going into this field. Like it's like demand and supply both is high in the world when it comes to machine learning and deep learning stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I understood. Akka. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Ms. Savidi, we have two questions in the chat box. I will direct them to you one by one.
Okay.
First one is, can you explain what is meant by computer vision and what are available opportunities?
Okay. So the computer vision is actually the field where try to, you know, like look into images and identify certain things. Now, when I'm showing you the CNN applications, I told you about 4 things, like we have classification, object detection, instance segmentation, object localization, like that. So these are the main tasks in the computer vision field. Applications can be anything, like it can be used in cross domain, like medicine, self-driving cars, as I explained, and even when it comes to things like you know, analyzing things, looking at images, it doesn't have to be the domain, but any image you have a look at and analyze it using computers, that falls under computer vision side. So yeah, so there are a lot of applications, not only like simple cat and dog classification, but when it comes to opportunities, I don't think there are a lot in Sri Lankan context though. But when it comes to foreign context, there are a lot. However, in Sri Lanka, there are companies who do facial recognition things, because to cater to the, you know, like they are premium customers, sort of, those kind of things are there. But other than that, most of the time, it is onto system side in local setup. And yeah, but in foreign side, there are a lot of medical related computer vision opportunities.
Okay, Ms. Savidi, thank you for the explanation. I will direct the next question. Can we use neural network for unsupervised learnings? If so, what type of neural networks good for unsupervised cases?
In the context of unsupervised, or rather, would I word it as self-supervised? There are networks like, you know, there are computer vision systems which do something called contrastive learning, I think. That side, where you contrast and like construct an image and take the ground truth image and decide on the gap of it, and then learn from that. So that kind of self-supervised systems are there. Unsupervised cases. Neural networks for the self-supervised or unsupervised, I'm not really much familiar with, actually. So yeah, that I could not properly answer, actually.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Saidi. I'll move on to the next question.
Mhm.
How can we use cloud computing to improve our workflows in deep learning? And is it necessary for someone following AI to master cloud computing?
It's not necessary to master. That's not necessary, but it's good to have the, the idea of how things are happening, what sort of things are happening. That idea is important, but you don't need to master it. So that's the answer for the last part. What's the first part? How can we use cloud computing to improve our workflows in deep learning? Okay, so one thing would be now when we go into production, we are getting a lot of data, right? So first we train a model with the set of data we have, but then we deploy that model, and then after that we are getting a lot of data day to day. So we can use like sort of pipelines and other, like AWS Asia kind of services which are in cloud computing to gather those data and auto train those models using this data. So these kind of applications are possible with cloud computing. Also, the training can be distributed, and we can have, when it comes to cloud computing, we can have huge instances. So therefore, we have more resources to train on, and we can shut down the resources after we did the training. So these kind of things are also available. And if we go for those main vendors, AWS or Azure or something like that, so they have different capabilities catering toward the machine learning and deep learning field. For example, in AWS we have SageMaker, and in Azure we have Azure ML Studio. Those kind of things cater into different aspects of machine learning, and there we can do things like grid search. I did not tell this before the theoretical parts, but it's sort of help you in hyperparameter tuning. So doing grid search and all those things you can do using the Azure kind of services. And also there's a concept called AutoML, where people who does not know anything about deep learning side or have like slight idea about deep learning side can go ahead and drag and drop and build things to do their task. So these kind of things are also, they are available in the cloud vendors, so we can use those as well. Okay, is that all, or do we have more questions?
Yes, that's all from the chat box.
Okay.
Seems like there are no more questions from the audience. So I would like to thank again Ms. Savindi for being with us here today and conducting this session. Please appreciate this virtual token of appreciation from us. And we really appreciate you sharing your valuable time, effort, and knowledge with us here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Okay, guys, we have provided you the feedback form in the chat box. Please fill it. We really need your feedback for our future events. In any event, there's a group of people who made sacrifices and efforts to make that event a success. They should be always thanked and appreciated. So, Pasan Chayawardena, Student Ambassador for IEEE Day 2021, representing the University of California, the mic is over to you for delivering the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Saruni. First of all, I must say it is a great pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks at the end of this event, and being able to coordinate the IEEE Day 2021 with 3 more universities is an honor for all of us at the University of California. Today we were able to celebrate the IEEE Day with an informative tech talk, and we got to know Ms. Savindi Vijayanayaka, who brought the session to us with the fullest dedication. Ms. Savindi, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and putting so much effort to educate us. Similarly, I convey my thanks to Mr. Mihindra Ranasinghe, the president of our student branch, and also the student counselor, Dr. Siddharth Liyanage, for the guidance they provide us. The unseen and unheard volunteers of our student branch who continue to support at every endeavor, including the moderator for today's session, Ms. Isuruni Ratnayaka, who were behind the smooth run of this event, Mr. Purnajit Ranasinghe and Mr. Gayan Muthukumara, the editors of the IEEE Student Branch, University of California, who were behind the creative contents of this event, and Ms. Kavindi Hansika, the secretary of IEEE Student Branch, University of California, who helped immensely in different aspects of this event. Thank you very much for being such an amazing personalities and giving your best throughout the organizing of this event. Without the four of you, this event would not have happened at all. And I'm grateful for the three other ambassadors from other universities, including Ms. Tashini Kamalka, Mr. Dilshan Vitana, and Mr. Heshan Jaisingh, who coordinated this event so well and was behind the success of today's event. And at last but not the least, my heartiest thanks to everyone who joined today's session and took part of this valuable opportunity. Alone we do so little, but together we do so much. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful evening. Over to you, Isuruni. Thank you.
Thank you, Pasan. With that, we have come to the end of today's session. Hope you enjoy the evening. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you for participating. Have a very good night. Let's meet with the fourth milestone of IEEE Hobnobbers.